Hello, everybody. Welcome back. So we've got some breaking news. It's like Anish Giri has got through to the candidates final. Not sure where it's actually going to be held. Where's it going to be held? Last time it was in somewhere like Canada, right? Toronto. Not sure. Where's it supposed to be held this time? We're not sure. But he beat Hans Niemann. I think Hans Niemann has, impressed a lot of people recently. But I think where he slips up, we turn the engine off. He slips up through lack of experience. I think Anish has got more experience. He's using that experience wisely. He's getting like a position which is slightly better for white. Tiny edge, like Magnus style, boring old man's chess, as they call it. And I think a lot of these guys, when they look at their opponents, they're thinking, what is the kind of position where that guy does well in? Where does Niemann do well? He plays a lot of online blitz, right? He's known to be good tactically. He's known to be strong in the middle game. But maybe he's not quite as good in technical positions where he has to defend. Slightly worse positions is maybe not a strength. I think that's probably what Anish was thinking before the game, because his strategy worked incredibly well. Bishop b5 check. So he takes on e7, and this is a pivotal moment. I'm actually surprised he doesn't take out the king here. Why didn't he take out the king? That looks more active, right? What was he afraid of? I mean, I really don't think that is a great option, because, why would you even be worse here as black? I mean, you could put the rooks here and here. Alternatively, could he maybe think about putting the king on c6? So he took with a knight, bishop e2, rook c8, f3, f6. This is a kind of position where, like Kramnik, I think, Kramnik circa 2000 when he played Kasparov would probably hold this for black. But it's quite an unpleasant position for black because there's no way to kill the game. And you're facing the bishop pair. I always say to people, whenever I've got students, the bishop pair is so important in chess. It's such a powerful weapon, especially in an open position. This is a fairly open position. Now, white wants to go e4 and put the bishop on e3. Having said that, when you go e4, you allow knight c6, knight d4. So you've got to time it. I think rook d1 was a very accurate move. The point is, if you go bishop a4, you have bishop c4 check. Hit the king, and then you push bishop back. So black played bishop e6. I think that was a reasonable choice. So h4. Also e4 was quite nice for white as well. And the idea is you're just simply going to go bishop e3. And I don't think there's an easy way for black to equalise the game already. It's slightly unpleasant. It's sort of a position where white can just push forever with no risk, which is a kind of ideal scenario that Giri wants. So I think as things stand, Firouzja unfortunately is out, because he drew with Bluebaum. So I think that means that Giri's confirmed to qualify. Now, just waiting on the Vincent Keymer Aragaisi match. If Keymer wins with black, which is a distinct possibility, then Bluebaum's out as well, I think, because I think Keymer was a down float, so he would have more points, I think. But at the moment, his tiebreak's worse than Bluebaum. So if he doesn't win, then Bluebaum was going to qualify. So you're going to get at least one German player in the candidates anyway. So good for Germany, good for Holland. Bad for France, bad for USA. USA have done well in this tournament. We've also had people like Avunga Liang, who's pressing with black against Nordy Breck last round. Nordy Breck played a lot better in this tournament. We've had people like who else did you have? Andy Woodward surprised a lot of people. Obviously, a lot of the older players, not older, but older relatively, like Levon Aronian and Wesley So have been doing well lately. So they're doing well overall in all categories. USA at chess. So rook d6, rook e8, g4, bishop b7. Yeah, this is all just really unpleasant stuff for black. So go back to that position when he took it. So eventually Anish won the game. Go back to this position. I don't understand why he didn't take with the king. What was wrong with taking the king? But it would have been the same sort of thing, right? You're just getting this really unpleasant position. Was there any way that black could have avoided all this earlier? He could have taken with a bishop, right? Maybe that was the key error, almost. And then later on, were there any ways that black could have maybe made his life a lot easier? Didn't really see any way that you could get out of this kind of unpleasant position. And clearly you got a chance. Yeah, I think that was also an error. Like 95 looks more natural. The idea of bishop c4 sometimes. So Hans lost that game, but Giri played extremely well in that game. Another game I wanted to look at was the game of Divya Deshmukh. Indian players have done very well here. If we go back to the opening, let's go back right to the start. Divya got a 2600 performance. I think that's the first time she's got a GM norm in a Swiss event, although she is actually a GM because she won the women's FIDE World Cup, I think it was. Was it the FIDE World Cup? The competition she won recently. That means that she automatically got the GM title. But I don't think she had any GM norms in normal Swisses. I could be wrong. But this would count as a GM norm anyway. Not that she needs it, but just to confirm that her title was deserved. It very much was. She played extremely well in this tournament, and most of the games against 2600 players. She also played 2700 Gukesh. She drew that game. World champion. Drew against world champion. Shows that she's got 2600 potential herself, I would say. I definitely think, I'm not sure if she'll get the 2600, but I definitely think she'll get the 2530, 2540 at some point in the near future, 2550. And to be up there with the top women players, the absolute, like the Chinese players like Zhu Jina, and obviously you've got the world champion, Zhu Wenju, who's somebody who's going to be tough to catch. But I think Divya is one of the players who's got a good chance of taking the title off her over the next few years. So you've got all this. I quite like these kind of lines for black, I'll be honest, because I think you've got good counter-attacking potential. It's all fairly equal. So what white is going for is some kind of initiative on the king's side. But bishop b7. In fact, I think in this position you could have also gone queen e4 and then bishop d3 was an interesting choice because that's threatening May. But then g6 was possible. This is what white would have been concerned about, with the threat of bishop b7. Or maybe rook d7 followed by bishop b7. So what do you do with a bishop on d3? Because it starts to become a target. If you go bishop c2, it's a bit passive. You could play that move with the idea that if I go bishop b7, you have queen e3, rook e8. But then what do you do? Like rook d1, rook d7. These are kind of lines I'll be looking at in the game. Rook d1, rook d7, bishop c2, bishop b7, and black seems to be okay. So, see when bishop d3. And the problem is that for white is that even though you're winning this pawn, the rest of your queen side isn't that great. Black's getting the initiative by attacking d3. You can't take there because the bishop takes f3 intermezzo, followed by taking on d3. So there's no way to gain any advantage here as white. And in fact, if anything, I think black is preferable here because of the practical chances. It seems to be. This is an excellent move. I actually remember the game in Brighton. My opponent used this strategy of putting the bishop on b7 and a queen on c6. And just pinning that knight down. So it's kind of like a prophylactic measure as much as anything. Queen to c6. Because it stops knight e1. Now, she went h4, which looks slightly weird because it doesn't really threaten anything. But one of the ideas maybe the white was concerned about was that black might go g5, g4. And the knight starts to become a problem. You know, you don't want to go to e1 because you drop a1, so you'd have to take on a8 first. So that might be some way that black could create some kind of counter-attacking chances. But of course that would be very weakening. And you could go rook a8 and knight e1 and then potentially counter-attack on the king side as white. So probably not. But I think he also wanted to have options to go knight g5 later on in the game. He could have played something else here. There were lots of other options. Knight e4 was an option, for example. H6 was an option. So all this is kind of normal. I think c4 was a good move. Yeah, this is where I was kind of surprised by her next move. I didn't really understand why she kept the queens on. Because it seems to me that only black could be better with the queens on the board. But I think that's what I said. When you watch these events, you only get a feel for how people play. You know, like Niemann, like I say, he's quite tactical. He's counter-attacking. You know, Firouzja tends to get into time trouble a lot, but plays very well when he's short of time. And Divya, a bit like Gukesh, is somebody who plays a very aggressive chess. And you know, she's known for not taking draws and stuff like that. And I think that's a policy that their coaches told them to do when they were much younger, possibly. To not, you know, maybe that's kind of like an Indian policy of not getting into this kind of wet mindset of taking draws and repetitions. That overall, your EV, you know, what's it expected? It's a bit like with poker, right? I don't know what I'm talking about now, but isn't it something like called EV, where you're expected, or you know, what the money you're expected to get back goes up in terms of if you don't take draws. So that's kind of what I think the whole strategy comes from. And I think in my career, if I'd have been bolder in certain situations, it would have paid off for me. And I'm trying to become like that a little bit more. But anyway, I think if you just trade it, I'm babbling a bit. Knight g5. Maybe she missed knight g5, but it seems to me that white is very comfortable here in terms of making a draw. Sure, there's still a lot of tension left. But maybe she remembered this endgame yesterday where she was suffering with the rooks on, so she decided to keep the queens on. Because you can't take here, I don't think, because of rook b8 check. Just show that variation. Rook b8. Now there's a back rank problem. You can block it with this, but then there's bishop h7 check. King goes here, now rook comes across. The only way to delay that is just give out the bishop for nothing. So you can't take the pawn. If again, the same problems if you take. It's slightly different now, actually, because no, it's actually just forced checkmate. Yeah. So you can't take the pawn. So black would. I'm sure black's fine anyway, but yeah, I was slightly surprised she didn't go for that because queen b3 is like, what are you doing, kind of thing. But bishop a8, queen d3, g6. Yeah. So this is an important moment, I think, for black. Yeah, and I remember looking at the evaluation here, and you say, like, well, how can black's play get a better position? The move that black missed, I think, was in terms of getting chances to win. I'm not saying it was winning or anything like that, but queen c7 was a very clever move. And the idea is you've kind of got a positional threat now taken on f3, where white cannot take back the queen because the queen takes c2. This is one of the ideas when you have this bishop on this long diagonal. So I'm not sure how white would have met that. Because also when you take on f3, and if I take out the pawn, e5 is hanging. Now maybe there's something like bishop d1, bishop takes f3, knight e5, and I don't know, maybe you move the queen there, or you take on e5, but that just looks like real suffering. So I'm not sure how white defends here, actually. I'll be honest. Doesn't look obvious. There's rook d1 maybe, bishop f3, queen d7, but then queen c2, right? So that doesn't work either. Yeah, so what would the computer recommend here for white? I mean, I would feel very uncomfortable here as white. I think it said it's about plus 0.9. But again, you know, from a practical point of view, even like plus 0.9, it's probably more than that because of just it's very difficult for White to find a useful move. You know, what's White's next move? This is why I didn't like this idea of keeping the queens on, because it seemed to be that White had no attacking chances here and was only going to get problems keeping the queen on the board. So what is the engine saying here? Actually, the best move is bishop d1, right? So if you trade a take with a bishop, yeah, and I can survive this position, apparently. But it was a chance. I think that's the thing at this level. You know, even if you're like a 2600 player like Cheparin, of who's, I think he's probably best known for being a second for Topalov for many years. A very strong player from Bulgaria. I think he's married to Stefanova, or his partner. His partner is also a Bulgarian player. Yeah, he's sort of very strong player. You know, very good dynamically, I would say. You know, plays kind of, you know, aggressive chess. He's obviously a very strong player, but yeah, even a player like that, maybe you only get slight chances now. You know, this is the level. It's so tough to win games now against players like Divya, who are very well prepared, and we saw that. He was really, during the course of the tournament, he was really kind of like, you know, keeping up with the. So I think here, really, realistically, got no sort of chance. I think even Rook D7 was a draw as well. Yeah, it was also a draw. So he did well there, to draw that game, but he had a slight chance. Gukesh won. A nice game, I think he was going to win, right, when I saw it. Where was he? Because he's actually, yeah, he won against Volaticki. I think there's a lot of nonsense talked about Gukesh because he's had a bad tournament here. People saying, oh, he's a weak world champion, all this kind of stuff. I mean, to be fair, you know, you won the world championship on merit. Right, it's getting very dark here, actually. You know, the fact that somebody stepped out of the cycle is irrelevant. It's not totally irrelevant, obviously, because Magnus Carlsen, who's been the best player for the last however many years, and not just the best player, but the best player probably by a long way. So it's not completely irrelevant, but at the end of the day, you know, you get that in other sports, don't you? You get, you know, there's people who won the world championship in snooker, for example. Like, you know, I'm sure there's years where maybe Stephen Hendry was the best player, and Peter Ebdon won, or something like that, you know, or Ken Doherty won. And there was obviously been years where Ronnie O'Sullivan's been the best player when he hasn't won it. Overall, he's the best player, but he doesn't win it every year. And it's the same with chess. You know, there's no guarantee that Magnus would have even won the match if he'd have played against Gukesh, right? I mean, he only won 2 of those matches narrowly. So, yeah, I think Gukesh is a deserving world champion, and he's had a bad tournament here, but he had a bad tournament in the last FIDE Grand Swiss, and he bounced back very, very, very well. So I don't think it's really that relevant. I do think that maybe overall there are better prospects going forward. I think you could get a situation in a few years with someone like Prague, someone like Nordic Breck, Vincent Keymer could be significantly ahead of Gukesh. We don't know. Nobody really knows. And obviously then you've got these juniors who have done incredibly well in this tournament. You've got people like Edgar Gomas, the Turkish guy, who's probably been the most impressive. And you've also got Mishra, hasn't lost a game here. He's played a very strong field. And he's only 16. He's obviously got world championship potential as well. So those guys going forward are probably going to improve quite quickly. And in 2 or 3 years' time, they're going to be up there in the top 10, I would guess. You know, maybe 4 or 5 years' time. We don't know how long it's going to take. So it's very unclear the situation going forward. And there's other people, even younger, like people like Faustina Oro. We've got people here in this country like Supratit and Bodhana, who are potentially going to be challenging. One game I was impressed me actually during the course of the tournament was this game that Firouzja played against Nihal Sarin. So he said that here he was thinking for quite a long time because he was trying to think of a way to get like an interesting game. And he wasn't quite sure like how to get an interesting game. You know, because if you go d6, then d4 is a problem. I mean, I've had a d6, a d4 before, and it's better for white, to be honest. If you want to keep the game interesting, d5 is possible, but it's very solid for white. You take and you go d4. Or you can also take and go knight f3 as well, but generally they go d4. So this is the Mora, sorry, the C3 Sicilian, or it's also called the what's it called as well? It's another name for the C, which I've now forgotten, which is shocking. But yeah, the C3 Sicilian anyway. I'm sure people will leave the comments down below. I might remember it in a minute. So he went knight f6, which I think is the best move. And I remember Tiviakov, who's an expert on the C3 Sicilian, if such a thing can be the case, said that knight f6 he thought was the best move. It's definitely the best response. If things are d5, white can get a slightly better position. Everything else is inferior. Like any other move like d6 or g6 or e6, he thinks is inferior. I think e6 actually, to be fair, is quite solid because you get lines similar to the French defence. But knight f6 is definitely the best move because it more or less forces white to go e5, and then you get this knight c6 again, the best move. And actually, funny enough, I think he played a line similar to what I had against Tiviakov. Or I remember I played my pawn to c4. And Tiviakov played a very nice game, actually, against me. But I didn't quite play like... I don't think I played g6, actually. I think maybe I went e5. Tiviakov played b3, but I can't really remember the game. He beat me in the Isle of Man like 1 year. Years ago. Maybe it was something like 2006, actually. I didn't play badly in that game, but he played very well. And yeah, at some point I went e5 and just to kind of... But then that allowed knight c4, possibly. So white has the centre here, but black has quite a reasonable play. So at this point... yeah, very aggressive move now by Nihal Sarin. He had a very good tournament actually overall. Parham collapsed towards the end, and I wondered if he was talking about playing Title Tuesday on just before one of the rest days, and he said, "Yeah, I'll play Title Tuesday." I think that's a bad idea when you're playing in the middle of a tournament to play like a tournament like Title Tuesday, which is quite tiring. So I think he ran out of energy, Parham. Possibly towards the end. But Nihal Sarin, other than this game, he didn't really do much wrong. So he sacks this piece, and this is where actually white could have got an advantage. He could have gone knight d6, king d7, and then f4. Here, I think, was the line. Now, the point is that if you take here, why is that not a good move? Maybe black just moves the queen, right? So if f4, if you take... It's all a bit complicated. Maybe there's stuff with queen f3 as well, right? I guess knight f7, and then yeah, it's just good for white, right? So you don't take, you go queen f6, I think. But then f5 it wanted, I think, from memory. And then when you take with a pawn, you just take with a knight, and then you're doing very well, apparently. Not obvious. You know, so the difference in the game was it went f4, but then black could put the king on d8, because if you go knight d6 immediately and king goes to king can't go to d8 because knight f7, so you have to go to d7. So that's the point. Now after this, now you could put the king on d8, which apparently is better than d7 because it doesn't block the bishop. All very complicated stuff, right? So White still had good play even here, but he started to run out of ideas a little bit. But I think by this point, I think Firouzja is quite happy because he's survived this dangerous attack. He's got to an end game, and it's not been checkmated. You know, and also I think another factor that comes into play in this matchup is actually he's possibly inside Nihal Sarin's head, or Sarin's got a bit of scar tissue, a bit of psychological disadvantage playing Firouzja. The reason I say that is because these guys played like a lot of these kind of bullet tournaments, you know, like the World Bullet Championships on chess.com and stuff like that, right? Or whatever it's called, I can't remember what it's called, but I remember Nihal Sarin getting crushed by Firouzja. And I think that kind of plays a role, weirdly enough, because the only person he lost to effectively in this tournament, Nihal, was Firouzja, who's another bullet player. Okay, so he took on a7. Excellent move now by black. Rather than taking back, which would be a terrible blunder because of rook a8 check, winning material, he played bishop f6. So he's just ready for king g7. Patient move by Firouzja. Now if you take it, now I will grab the pawn. And I'm very happy because the king I can tuck my king away. Very safe on g7. So I think at this point it's definitely practically better for black because he's got a much safer king. King g7. And again, all these moves, excellent moves like b5, like, you know, that's a move that a lot of players wouldn't even consider. The idea that if you take on b5, then I take on f4. You could ask, why didn't he do that immediately, which is a good question. Well, I think the point is that if you take, then you get this position, which is apparently okay for white. But the point is that if you go here and then you take, and now pawn still remains on g4, which is annoying for white. Even though he's got two passed pawns on the queen side and the bishop pair, black has a lot of tactical threats. So he took here. Yeah, b4, another excellent move. I like what Firouzja was doing here. Rook e8 again because there's a threat of taking here. So you've got to take a move out to stop that. And he took. Again, excellent move here by black, which I didn't see when I was watching this. I like the way he's just playing actively. You know, he's activating his pieces. And this way, really, he shows his 1 minute skills, I think. Because he went rook d5, I think, here. No, sorry, he went knight d3 first. Bishop e3. And now, excellent move, rook d5. Just aggressive move. Attacking the pawn on c5. And this is where white went quite badly wrong. This is where he made almost like a losing mistake. This reminds me of Lasker, actually, because he always used to like using his rooks actively in the middle of the board. You know, rook d5. I mean, for me, Firouzja is definitely one of the stronger, younger players. If he can start to be a bit more consistent, you know, cut out the bad tournaments, because like Singfield Cup, he had quite a bad tournament. He's always going to be a little bit streaky because that's the way he plays. He's quite dynamic. I think he's definitely got potential to, you know, be like maybe world #1 or something like that, right? Or, you know, be world champion. It'd be interesting to see how he gets on in the FIDE World Cup because that's probably his last realistic hope of getting through to the candidates. If he even plays the FIDE World Cup. So I think here white could have just maybe played h3 or something. There was some weird lines like... I think here you do have like some resources like bishop h6. I can't actually remember what was the line. Yeah, I think it's okay. It's not great, but I think there was also bishop e2 was playable. When you take here, there's some weird stuff with like this. And you can't go rook f5 because I trade and then I take on c5. And when you go here, I go rook f6. And then I go here apparently. Apparently this is, yeah, this is very tough to see when you got no time, right? So he blundered here when Nihal with bishop f3, which looks like a natural move. Turns out to be a big error because of this move. Because the point is bishop d4 is rook g5 check. So whether he missed that, I don't know. But now black was just clearly better. It looked like Firouzja was going to win easily, but it's quite tricky to win this position. And at some point he made a big error. But I think all this is fine. Yeah, all this is fine. I think knight c3 was fine, yeah. Knight e4 was also fine. But this is, yeah, bishop g3 was a big mistake, I think. Oh no, it was bishop f2 later. It was bishop f2 later. Yeah, that was a big error. Apparently there were much better moves, like just g5 or something. It's quite tricky from a human perspective to win this position though. It's also, you know, the guy's going to really keep defending really well. Which he did. Yeah, so here he could have gone here. So what he did, I think he did play that move actually, but then he should have actually played this immediately and then played this. It's quite a tricky endgame to understand. No, hang on. The point is after this, you can't go king f8 because of bishop. Here you go bishop g5. So I think the point is that you're getting a lot of counterplay against the pawns. Like say if you take and go bishop e3, maybe there's bishop d7 or bishop e8. Because the pawns are so passive. And the black king is quite bad. So really quite poor technique by Firouzja to allow this actually at all really. And yeah, so at some point, I think this ending, even though the engine would draw it, I think for a human it's just so hard to hold. You know, especially when short of time, you're just never going to hold it. Like, black can just play and play and play. And it's not surprising that Nihal Sarin lost that game. So basically you got a situation where if we go back to round 11, the game's still in progress, right? Vincent Keymer drew in the end, right, against Arjun. So it was a draw that game. So Vincent Keymer, I think, would have to rely on tiebreak. I think his tiebreak is worse than Bluebaum's. So it looks like Bluebaum will qualify along with Giri. Bluebaum's had a great year because he's finished second in this and he won a European Championships. He was this player that has always done well online in Title Tuesday, but he's been 2600 for quite a number of years actually. He's played tournaments like Dortmund before and stuff like that. So he's been like a top player for a number of years. He's not like a newbie or anything like that. But yeah, I mean, that's going to be interesting. So far in the candidates, I think you've got Caruana, you've got Ding. If he takes up, will Ding take up his spot? I suppose Ding will have a place in candidates because he won the World Championship before and then he lost in the World Championship final. So Ding would have a spot in theory, but will he take up his spot because he's obviously not been really playing any chess lately? So that's an interesting subs tale. And then you've got Nakamura, who'd be like the third player based on rating. So I think Caruana, Ding, Nakamura, Prague, FIDE Grand Prix or whatever it's called. And then you've got these two players, so that makes 6, and then 2 more I think from the FIDE World Cup. So I think the interesting question will be like who will qualify from the FIDE World Cup. It's very unclear. As we've seen here, we've had a lot of upsets. Firouzja I think was unlucky because he lost to Parham when Parham was playing well, and then he collapsed at the end. If he played Parham at the end of the tournament, it's 1 or 2 players have been unlucky. Keymer had a winning position in round 10, he failed to convert, so he was unlucky as well. Mishra's unlucky as well because he had a great field, but he's young, so he's going to have a lot of chances going forward. it's going to be interesting to see how those kind of younger players like Mishra and Edric Gomez get on in the candidates. Sorry, in the FIDE World Cup, whether they get any through any rounds. So that's going to, I'm not sure where that is. I'm not sure where the candidates is, but it's going to be very interesting. But I think the other interesting question is, will Dean take up his place in the he probably will, but it doesn't seem certain to me given how little chess he's played, and you know, we know he's been suffering from sort of like, he's been quite open about suffering from, you know, mental problems in terms of the pressure and everything. Does he even want to be world champion again? That's another question. Anyway, leave your comments down below. Thanks for watching the video. If anyone has actually watched the video, that's really kind of you. And yeah, that's brilliant. Thanks again. Please like and subscribe so the video can be promoted on the algorithm. Oh, by the way, I've got to mention my name, but anyway, it should be in the description. My name is Michael Keymer.